They say the loudest sound in a crumbling marriage is a slammed door or a screaming match. They are wrong. The loudest sound is the silence of a clicked mouse canceling a $2,500 recurring transfer that my husband's family secretly depends on. I did not key his car when he told me my mother's tragedy was not his problem. I just smiled, logged into my bank, and dismantled his entire reality. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We want to take a moment to honestly share that YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which unfortunately means we will soon have to stop posting new public videos here. If you enjoy our content and want to support us, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to exclusive, incredibly detailed true stories that we cannot share on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us begin today's story, as told by a woman named Farah Klein. Our 6th wedding anniversary dinner was held at a ridiculously overpriced, exclusive restaurant in the heart of downtown Seattle. Marcus always insisted on places like this. He thrived on the ambient glow of imported brass chandeliers, the hushed tones of waiters in immaculate tailored suits, and the quiet clinking of crystal glasses. He liked feeling important, and more importantly, he liked looking important to everyone else in the room. I was wearing a silk dress I had purchased specifically because he said it made me look like the polished wife of a rising tech visionary. I was playing the part perfectly, just as I had for the last 72 months of our marriage. We were waiting for our main courses when my phone vibrated intensely inside my clutch. I usually make it a strict rule to ignore calls during evening dates, but the caller ID showed the main switchboard of the local hospital back in my hometown. A cold dread washed over me. I excused myself from the table and rushed out to the quiet, marble-lined lobby. The voice on the other end was a frantic emergency room doctor. My mother, Eleanor, had just suffered a massive, debilitating stroke. She was stabilized for the moment, but the medical prognosis was severe. She required immediate, intensive, and staggeringly expensive rehabilitation at a specialized care facility. The exact kind of premium facility that insurance companies fought tooth and nail to avoid covering. My vision blurred. The polished floor of the restaurant lobby seemed to tilt violently beneath my heels, but I took a deep breath, swallowed the massive lump of panic rising in my throat, smoothed my silk dress, and walked back to our table. Marcus was swirling his glass of vintage Cabernet, admiring the deep red legs of the wine against the crystal. I sat down and told him the devastating news. I laid out the grim situation clearly and calmly, keeping my voice steady. I suggested that we temporarily reduce our aggressive contributions to our joint investment accounts just for a few short months. It was a highly logical request. We had more than enough financial padding. My corporate executive salary was substantial, and my mother desperately needed our help right now. Marcus did not even blink. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, savored it for an agonizingly long second, placed the glass back onto the crisp white tablecloth, and looked me dead in the eye. "Farah, your parents are your problem," he said, his voice as smooth and unaffected as if he were declining a side dish of asparagus. "My money is my money, and your money is your money. Do not drag me into it." The air in my lungs instantly turned to solid ice. For 6 entire years, I had foolishly believed we were building an empire together, a true partnership of equals. My mind raced, but it did not plummet into a valley of grief or female hysteria. Instead, the analytical, data-driven side of my brain kicked into overdrive. It went straight to the numbers. Specifically, it went to the exact sum of $2,500. That was the amount I manually transferred on the first day of every single month into a joint account labeled the Silverwood Trust. It was a secretive real estate venture Marcus had pitched to me years ago, framing it as a brilliant, tax-advantaged strategy to secure our luxurious early retirement. He managed the trust on paper, but I funded the absolute lion's share of it with my hard-earned corporate director salary. "My money is my money," he had just declared with complete arrogance. A weaker woman might have cried right there into her expensive linen napkin. A louder, more impulsive woman might have thrown the expensive Cabernet directly into his perfectly groomed face and stormed out of the restaurant, causing a dramatic scene that he would inevitably use later to paint her as mentally unstable to our social circle. I did neither of those things. I looked at the man sitting across from me, really looked at the hollow shell of a partner he was, and realized he was nothing but a parasite dressed in a designer suit. The blinding panic over my mother evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, absolute clarity. I picked up my own glass of champagne. The golden bubbles danced cheerfully in the dim light. I did not shed a single tear for my dying marriage. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate, and freezing curve of my lips, and raised my glass toward him. "You are absolutely right, Marcus," I said softly, clinking my glass against his with a sharp chime. "To our separate lives." He smiled back, completely oblivious to the fact that his supreme arrogance had just handed me the keys to his financial destruction. He sat there, chewing his expensive steak, thinking he had just set a firm, masculine boundary. He did not realize he had just given me absolute, unquestionable permission to burn his entire world to the ground. We arrived home in absolute silence. The moment Marcus dropped his keys on the entryway table and headed straight for the master bedroom, I knew my window of opportunity had opened. I waited until his rhythmic snoring echoed down the hallway. Then, I slipped out of my clothes, changed into a simple cotton robe, and walked barefoot to my home office. I stepped inside and firmly locked the heavy oak door behind me. The sharp click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the sound of a vault sealing shut. I sat down at my mahogany desk and booted up my encrypted workstation. As a senior data analyst at Auranova Tech Solutions, my entire career was built on hunting down anomalies in massive, complex oceans of numbers. People lie, faces deceive, and marital vows can be easily broken, but routing numbers and transaction hashes always tell the brutal, unvarnished truth. Tonight, my own marriage was the data set, and I was going to run a ruthless, full-scale forensic audit. I opened a secure incognito browser window and logged directly into our master banking portal. I completely bypassed the superficial, user-friendly dashboard and pulled the raw, unedited statement data for the past 72 months. My target was the Silverwood Trust, for years. Marcus had aggressively guarded the administrative login credentials for this specific portfolio. He had always claimed the complex financial jargon would only stress me out, insisting he was handling the heavy lifting for our future. It took me less than 15 minutes to bypass his flimsy password security by answering his painfully obvious security questions regarding his childhood pets and favorite sports teams. The screen refreshed, dropping the firewall and granting me total, unrestricted administrative access to the inner workings of his supposed real estate empire. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I initiated a trace on the monthly transfers. The exact sum of $2,500 that left my paycheck every single month did not go into a diversified index fund, nor did it go toward an emerging commercial property market as he had promised. I copied the destination routing numbers and cross-referenced them with public county tax databases and municipal property registries. The digital trail did not lead to an investment portfolio. It led directly to a luxury high-rise condominium located in the absolute most expensive zip code of downtown Seattle. I pulled up the property deed and the utility registrations. The occupants listed on the building roster were not high-paying corporate tenants. The registered residents were Beatrice, my constantly critical mother-in-law, and Julian, my perpetually unemployed, aspiring artist brother-in-law. A hollow, ringing sensation started in my ears, but I forcefully pushed it down, letting the cold logic of my corporate training take the wheel. I opened another tab and dug deeply into the maintenance fees, the property tax escrows, and the homeowner association dues. It was all being paid directly by the trust, my hard-earned money. They were living in a multi-million-dollar skyline sanctuary, enjoying panoramic views of the city, completely and entirely rent-free. The picture of Marcus's grand sociopathic deception began to crystallize with sickening clarity. Every single Thanksgiving, every Christmas dinner, Marcus would sit at the head of the dining table, soaking up the absolute adoration of his mother and brother. Beatrice would constantly praise him to our extended family, weeping theatrical tears of joy about how her brilliant, successful tech investor son had rescued her from financial ruin and provided her with a gorgeous home. Julian would dramatically raise a glass of expensive wine to his big brother, thanking him for being his generous patron and allowing him to pursue his abstract painting career without the crushing burden of a normal day job. Marcus had meticulously constructed a flawless, messianic facade. He was the benevolent patriarch, the financial genius, the absolute savior of his family. And I realized in that dark room that he had purchased every single ounce of that godlike reverence using my sweat, my exhausting overtime hours at Oronova, and my senior management salary. But the digital rabbit hole went much deeper. The luxury condominium was just the concrete foundation of the lie. I noticed a series of automated clearinghouse transfers branching off from the main trust account into two separate, secondary credit lines. I immediately recognized the last four digits of those accounts. They were supplementary credit cards legally tied to my primary credit profile. Cards that Marcus had explicitly claimed he had shredded and canceled years ago because he said they carried overly high interest rates. I pulled the itemized monthly billing statements for those two supposedly destroyed cards. The widescreen filled with hundreds of individual transactions that made my blood run entirely cold. There were massive charges sustaining Julian's extravagant, faux bohemian lifestyle. I saw receipts for VIP bottle service at exclusive underground nightclubs, $1,000 charges at premium art supply boutiques, and all-inclusive weekend snowboarding trips to luxury resorts in Aspen. Then came Beatrice's expenses, the woman who constantly criticized my sensible corporate wardrobe and told me I worked too much, was racking up astronomical bills on my dime. I scrolled through endless swipes for elite medical spa packages, imported chemical skin peels, daily organic grocery deliveries, and seasonal designer handbags from high-end boutiques I could not even afford to shop at myself. They were systematically draining me dry. My husband was not just protecting his precious wealth from my mother's unexpected medical emergency. He was actively and secretly funneling my wealth to fund a decadent, consequence-free existence for his own family, all while looking me dead in the eye just hours ago and declaring that my flesh and blood were not his problem. I sat back heavily in my ergonomic leather chair. The digital clock on my desktop monitor quietly flipped to 3 o'clock in the morning. A normal wife would have shattered right then and there. A normal wife would have marched straight into the master bedroom, flipped on the glaring overhead lights, and screamed until her vocal cords bled, demanding answers and apologies. But I did not feel the urge to scream. I did not shed a single tear. Crying is an expression of helplessness, an admission of defeat. Staring at the glowing, damning data illuminated across my dual monitors, I had never felt more dangerously powerful in my entire life. I opened a fresh, blank spreadsheet program. I titled the new file Operation Silverwood, with the meticulous, unfeeling precision of a surgeon preparing for a major amputation. I began to log every single unauthorized transaction, every hidden property fee, every fraudulent credit swipe. I categorized them perfectly by date, by specific user, and by merchant category. I even calculated the exact compound interest Marcus had effectively stolen from my future retirement. I built a flawless, mathematically undeniable ledger of his financial treason. This was no longer a marriage with communication issues. It was an active crime scene. And as I saved the encrypted spreadsheet to my secure local drive, backing it up to a hidden cloud server, I knew exactly how I was going to execute the maximum penalty. The audit was complete, the hard evidence was secured, and the silent countdown to a merciless financial purge had officially begun. Promptly at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I sat in the aggressively air-conditioned office of Diane Vance, a senior financial attorney known for having the warmth of a glacier and the tactical brilliance of a chess grandmaster. I did not need a divorce lawyer yet. I needed a financial assassin. I handed Diane the encrypted flash drive containing the complete ledger of the Silverwood operation. She reviewed the data in total silence, her eyes tracking the monumental scale of Marcus's deceit. When she finally looked up, there was a glimmer of genuine professional respect in her sharp gaze. We wasted no time on tears or therapy talk. We executed a surgical strike on the cash flow. First, I officially revoked the automated clearinghouse mandate that siphoned $2,500 from my primary corporate salary account every single month. I watched the bank teller hit the enter key, officially severing the main artery that fed the luxury condominium. Next came the credit lines. With Diane acting as my legal proxy, we initiated an immediate, hard lock on all supplementary cards tied to my Social Security number. We flagged them as compromised. I ensured that all fraud alerts and cancellation notices were routed exclusively to a newly created secure email address, completely bypassing our shared home network and Marcus's personal devices. The blade fell silently. There were no sirens, no red flashing lights, no dramatic notifications popping up on my husband's sleek smartphone. The money simply ceased to exist for him. With the financial parasite successfully detached, I redirected the lifeblood. Diane helped me establish a legally ironclad, irrevocable medical trust in my name alone. The massive influx of newly freed capital, completely shielded from any community property claims, was routed directly to the premier rehabilitation center where my mother, Eleanor, was fighting for her recovery. I paid the first month of her premium intensive care in full, in cash. Knowing my mother was receiving the absolute highest standard of neurological therapy, funded by the very money my husband tried to hoard for his pampered family, brought a cold, terrifying sense of peace to my chest. By 6 o'clock that evening, I pulled my car into the driveway of our suburban home. I took a deep breath, adjusting my expression in the rearview mirror until it settled into the familiar, placid mask of a supportive wife. I walked through the front door, kicked off my heels, and went straight to the kitchen. I prepared a beautiful pan-seared salmon with roasted asparagus, Marcus's absolute favorite weeknight meal. When he arrived home, he kissed my cheek with the practiced ease of a man who firmly believed he owned the world. We sat at the dining table, and I poured him a glass of the expensive red wine he loved so much. I sat across from him, eating quietly, maintaining eye contact, and nodding in all the right places as he launched into a lengthy, arrogant monologue about a supposedly groundbreaking new software integration project he was conceptualizing. He gestured animatedly with his fork, pontificating about market shares and venture capital, utterly convinced of his own towering intellect. It was a masterful performance on both our parts. He played the visionary architect of our future, completely unaware that his digital empire was built on a foundation of sand that had just washed away. His private banking app, resting right next to his wine glass, still displayed the previous month's balances. He had no idea that his accounts were now nothing but a hollow shell. He did not realize that without my massive corporate salary acting as the hidden engine, his financial vehicle had already run entirely out of gas and was silently careening toward a concrete wall. I listened to his booming voice, watching the smug satisfaction radiating from his pores, and felt absolutely nothing but a clinical detachment. After dinner, while he retreated to the living room to watch financial news networks, I stood at the kitchen sink, slowly washing the dishes. My eyes drifted to the glossy calendar pinned to the corkboard beside the refrigerator. The luxury condominium management company always issued their brutal late fee warnings on the 15th. The premium credit card companies allowed a 21-day grace period before initiating hard service denials and aggressive collection calls. The tow truck companies usually took about 30 days of non-payment before repossessing luxury vehicles. I dried my hands on a towel and picked up a red marker. I did not draw a dramatic circle or a menacing cross. I simply made a tiny, almost invisible dot on the designated day. I knew exactly how this ecosystem functioned. Beatrice and Julian were apex parasites who consumed resources at a staggering, unsustainable rate. Without my hidden financial blood transfusions, their entire fraudulent, aristocratic reality had a maximum survival window of exactly 30 days before the financial gravity would brutally rip them back down to earth. The trap was set, the lock was engaged, and all I had to do now was sit back and watch the invisible poison work its way through the system. Day 30 arrived exactly as I had calculated. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. I was already at my corporate office, calmly reviewing quarterly data sets and sipping a black coffee, while Marcus's entire universe began to violently unravel. At exactly 9 o'clock, his pristine smartphone started vibrating aggressively across his polished mahogany desk. It was not an important client calling to finalize a lucrative contract. It was the senior property manager of the luxury high-rise condominium. The automated voicemail was painfully polite, but legally firm. The manager mentioned severely overdue maintenance fees, newly applied penalty charges, and a glaring failure to process the monthly mortgage allocation that was supposed to clear days ago. Marcus ignored the first two calls, arrogantly assuming it was a simple clerical error committed by some incompetent bank teller. He swiped away the notifications with a quick flick of his thumb, entirely unaware that the foundational steel beams of his fake financial empire were snapping right beneath his feet. 30 minutes later, the secondary shockwave hit the system. Beatrice was standing at the polished marble checkout counter of a remarkably high-end designer boutique downtown. She had two imported leather handbags resting in front of her, chatting amicably with the senior sales associate who knew her by her first name. She handed over the sleek, heavy metal credit card with absolute, unshakable confidence. The associate ran the chip through the terminal. The machine beeped an ugly, aggressive, and highly unusual tone. Declined. Beatrice laughed it off immediately, waving her hand and loudly blaming a banking network glitch. She demanded they run it again. The associate tried for a second time. Declined. Code 05. Do not honor. Beatrice's heavily powdered face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson as the other wealthy patrons in the quiet store turned their heads to watch the unfolding commotion. She snatched the card back, practically sprinting out of the boutique. Her hands were shaking violently as she pulled out her phone and unleashed a barrage of frantic, all-caps text messages to Marcus. She demanded to know why her premium gold card was suddenly functioning like a piece of useless plastic. Before Marcus could even begin to process his mother's digital screaming, his phone rang again. This time, it was Julian, and his voice was cracking with absolute, unfiltered hysteria. Julian had just woken up at noon, terribly hungover from a Monday night underground warehouse party, only to find the designated parking spot outside his favorite artisan coffee shop completely empty. His imported European sports car was gone. Julian screamed into the receiver that he had been targeted by professional car thieves. The truth, however, was far more pathetic and strictly mathematical. I had quietly stopped making the exorbitant lease payments on that specific luxury vehicle exactly 90 days ago, well before my mother's tragic stroke, simply because I was completely exhausted by funding his reckless driving habits. The bank's repossession team had quietly hooked the vehicle up in the dead of night and dragged it away. Julian demanded that Marcus wire him $10,000 instantly to fix the situation, screaming wildly about his ruined social image and how he could not possibly be seen riding the public bus. Marcus was heavily sweating now. The confident, untouchable tech visionary mask was completely melting off his face in real time. He sprinted to his private office door, locked it, and frantically opened his primary banking application. He typed in his complex password, access denied. He typed it again, his fingers trembling so badly he dropped his phone on the desk. Incorrect credentials. A cold, suffocating panic clawed directly at his throat. He dialed the Platinum customer service phone line, rapidly answering the automated security questions, only to be informed by a cheerfully detached representative that the primary account holder had entirely liquidated the joint funds, completely severed all supplementary lines of credit, and permanently restricted his administrative access. The representative happily informed him that the current available balance on his personal checking account was barely enough to cover a mid-range dinner for two. He had zero leverage. He possessed zero liquid capital. In a blind, unthinking panic, he started rapidly texting his wealthy college fraternity brothers, desperately begging for a quick bridge loan to cover an unexpected liquidity crisis. Every single one of them read the messages and responded with absolute silence. Desperate, utterly cornered, and hyperventilating in his leather desk chair, Marcus finally called me. I let the phone ring exactly 4 times before I casually picked up, staring out at the beautiful Seattle skyline from my corner office window. "Farah, what the hell is going on?" he shouted, his voice shrill and completely devoid of its usual arrogant, commanding bass. "My cards are entirely dead. The building manager is threatening legal eviction. Julian's car just got repossessed. Where is the money?" I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I did not sound angry. I spoke clearly, softly, and coldly. "Marcus, your family is your problem," I replied, feeding his exact, poisonous words directly back into his ear. "My money is my money, and your money is your money. Figure it out yourself." I firmly pressed the red button and disconnected the call before he could even draw a ragged breath to reply. I set my phone face down on my desk and took a slow sip of my coffee. Across town, the horrifying realization that their golden goose was rapidly choking to death finally dawned on Beatrice and Julian. Marcus was no longer answering their frantic, back-to-back phone calls. The limitless, magical, automated teller machine they had relied on for 6 incredible years was completely shattered, driven by a highly volatile, toxic mix of generational entitlement, sheer terror, and absolute fury. They did not wait for an invitation or an explanation. They hailed a premium rideshare service, entirely unable to drive themselves anywhere, and directed the confused driver straight toward the affluent suburban neighborhood where Marcus and I lived. They were completely convinced that a simple, highly aggressive verbal confrontation would somehow bully the universe into restoring their luxurious, consequence-free reality. They were marching straight into the blast zone, completely blind to the absolute destruction waiting for them on my living room floor. I had left the corporate office precisely at 4 o'clock, anticipating the inevitable collision. I was sitting calmly on the pristine white sofa in our spacious living room, quietly sipping a glass of iced water, when the front door flew open violently. It slammed hard against the entryway wall with a bone-jarring crack. Marcus stumbled in first. His designer silk tie was yanked completely loose. His expensive button-down shirt was drenched in nervous sweat, and his eyes were wild with sheer, unfiltered terror. He was frantically waving his hands, desperately trying to block the open doorway, but he was forcefully shoved aside by his own mother. Beatrice marched into my home like a conquering general. She wore her signature designer sunglasses indoors, her high heels clicking aggressively and loudly against the imported hardwood floors. Julian trailed closely behind her, his face twisted into an ugly, petulant scowl, looking entirely ridiculous in his oversized, incredibly expensive streetwear. The air in the room instantly turned heavy and toxic. Beatrice did not even bother with a basic greeting. She stormed right up to where I was sitting, pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, and unleashed a torrent of absolute, blinding entitlement. "What kind of psychotic, jealous episode are you having? Farah," she screamed, her shrill voice echoing sharply off the high ceilings. "Are you actively trying to sabotage my son's brilliant career? Marcus is a visionary, and you are throwing a petty, childish financial temper tantrum." My platinum card was declined in front of the entire boutique. Julian's car was stolen by repo men right off the street. You need to pick up your phone right this exact second. Call your little banker friends, and unlock my son's corporate accounts before I drag your name through the mud in our entire social circle. You are an ungrateful, suffocating anchor dragging down a truly great man. Julian chimed in from the hallway, loudly complaining that his entire artistic life was ruined. He whined that he had been utterly humiliated in front of his wealthy underground friends because he had to call a cheap cab. aggressively blaming my supposed emotional instability for his devastating social embarrassment. Marcus was practically hyperventilating. His chest heaved rapidly up and down. His eyes darted wildly between my calm face and his mother's furious expression. He grabbed Beatrice's arm, his fingers digging deeply into her expensive jacket, begging her to step outside, pleading with her to wait in the car for just 5 minutes. He turned his panicked, bloodshot gaze to me, his voice dropping to a pathetic, trembling whisper that was entirely devoid of the masculine arrogance he had displayed at our anniversary dinner. "Farah, please," Marcus begged, clasping his hands together like a cornered, desperate animal. "Let us go into the master bedroom. Please. We can fix everything. We can go to marriage counseling tomorrow morning. Just let me explain everything in private. Do not do this right now. Please. I am begging you." He was desperately trying to herd his family away from the blast radius, completely terrified of the truth coming to light. He wanted to preserve the carefully constructed, godlike illusion he had fed them for over 70 months. I did not move toward the bedroom. I did not raise my voice a single decibel to match Beatrice's hysterical pitch. I simply stood up from the sofa, carefully smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored skirt, and walked slowly toward the heavy glass coffee table resting in the center of the room. I reached underneath the glass shelf and pulled out a massive, heavily bound legal folder. It contained 6 entire years of comprehensive bank statements, signed tax returns, and itemized credit card bills, every single unauthorized transaction, every hidden fee, and every parasitic withdrawal was highlighted in bright, unforgiving, neon red ink. I lifted the heavy binder and dropped it flat onto the glass table. The heavy, authoritative thud echoed loudly through the silent living room, instantly stopping Marcus dead in his tracks. He flinched violently as if I had just fired a weapon. "Open it!" I commanded, looking directly into Beatrice's furious eyes. She hesitated, her aggressive posture faltering slightly under my completely unbothered stare. Before she stepped forward and flipped the thick cover open, Marcus lunged forward, desperately trying to slap the folder shut, but I caught his wrist mid-air. My physical grip was entirely composed but undeniably firm. I pushed his shaking hand away, maintaining direct eye contact with his mother. I did not let Marcus speak a single word. I raised my voice, cutting through the heavy, suffocating air with absolute, surgical precision. "Your golden child is an absolute fraud, Beatrice," I declared, my voice ringing clear and cold in the large room. "Marcus has not contributed a single solitary penny to that luxury downtown condominium you live in. He is not a tech genius. He is not a wealthy investor. He is a pathetic parasite." I watched her eyes widen in sheer horror as I read the damning numbers aloud, spelling out his complete financial treason for everyone to hear. "That beautiful skyline view you always brag about to your friends," I continued relentlessly, "that is secured by exactly $2,500 that comes directly out of my corporate paycheck on the first day of every single month. Your precious son set up a dummy trust fund and used my hard-earned salary to pay your rent while looking me in the eye and telling me he was securing our early retirement." I reached down and flipped a large section of the pages, exposing a massive sea of red ink. "Look at the specific line items. Beatrice," I ordered, "your expensive organic grocery deliveries, your imported chemical skin peels, the premium medical spa days you take every single Tuesday, even those beautiful, expensive diamond earrings Marcus handed you for your 60th birthday, the ones you cried over because your son was so incredibly generous, all of it, every single cent, was purchased using my supplementary credit accounts, my sweat, my exhausting overtime hours, my money." Beatrice physically swayed on her feet. The artificial powdered color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking completely hollow and incredibly old. She frantically flipped through page after page, her trembling fingers tracing the highlighted red lines, her eyes locking onto my legally printed signature at the bottom of every single authorization form. The messianic illusion of her incredibly successful, generous son shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces right there on my living room rug. Julian violently pushed past her, grabbing a heavy fistful of the credit card statements. He stared in disbelief at the itemized list of his massive underground nightclub tabs, his premium ski resort trips to Aspen, and his exorbitant luxury car lease payments. I looked straight at Julian, my expression totally blank. "Your generous patron," I informed him quietly, "used my money to buy your love and admiration, because he has absolutely nothing of his own." The silence that followed was heavy, crushing, and completely deafening. Then, the anger shifted dramatically. Julian threw the crumpled papers directly into Marcus's chest. He started screaming at his older brother, his voice cracking with pure rage, calling him a pathetic liar and a massive fake. He cursed Marcus for building a fake reality and making them completely dependent on a woman who now held the absolute power to destroy their entire lives in an instant. Marcus finally found a fraction of his voice. He dropped to his knees right next to Beatrice's armchair, grabbing her hands away from her face. "Mom, please listen to me," he pleaded, tears of pure humiliation streaming down his face. "I was going to pay it all back. I have a massive software deal pending. I just needed to borrow her credit to keep you guys comfortable until my investments matured. You have to believe me. I did it for you. I did it for our family." Beatrice ripped her hands out of his grasp with absolute, unfiltered disgust. She looked down at him not with a mother's unconditional love, but with the cold, calculating fury of a woman who just realized her entire social standing was built on a humiliating lie. "You made me a charity case," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You let me parade around town bragging about my successful boy, while I was secretly living off the scraps of a woman who despises me. You are absolutely pathetic." Beatrice collapsed heavily into the armchair, covering her face with her shaking hands, weeping loudly. Marcus remained completely frozen on his knees in the center of the wreckage, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish, utterly stripped of his power, his fake dignity, and his meticulously constructed reality. For a long moment, the only sound in the living room was Beatrice's ragged sobbing. Marcus slowly pushed himself off the floor. The humiliation radiating from his mother and brother seemed to finally snap something deep inside his brain. The panic morphed into a cornered, venomous rage. He straightened his ruined posture, glaring at me with absolute hatred. "Fine," Marcus spat, his voice trembling with sheer spite. "You want to play the corporate villain? We are done. Farah, I will file the divorce papers tomorrow morning, but do not think for 1 second you are walking away with my investments. Washington is a community property state. That luxury condominium was purchased during our marriage. I will drag you through mediation for years, and I will force the courts to liquidate that property and give me my legal 50% on my end." I stared at him for a few seconds. Then, a genuine, completely unscripted laugh bubbled up from my chest. It echoed brightly off the high ceilings, chilling and utterly devoid of warmth. I reached back into the heavy legal folder on the glass table and pulled out a single, neatly stapled packet of premium watermarked paper. "You really should have paid closer attention to the paperwork you made me sign 6 years ago. Marcus," I said, sliding the packet across the glass toward him. "You were so desperate to secure that premium mortgage rate, but your personal credit history was absolute garbage after those failed startups in your 20s. Do you remember what you did to bypass the bank's background checks?" He stared at the documents, his face draining of whatever color had briefly returned. "You formed a limited liability shell company to purchase the property," I explained slowly, spelling out his absolute doom. "And because my credit score was flawless, you made me the sole managing member. My name is the only one on the deed. It is not community property. Marcus, legally speaking, it is a single-member entity fully owned by me, and you signed your rights away in front of a public notary because you were too arrogant to realize you were handing me the absolute keys to your castle." I turned my gaze to Beatrice and Julian, who had suddenly stopped their arguing to listen. I reached into my blazer pocket and retrieved 2 crisp, white envelopes. I dropped them unceremoniously onto Beatrice's lap. "Those are formally filed, legally binding 30-day eviction notices," I announced, my voice dropping to a decisive, lethal whisper. You have exactly 4 weeks to pack your designer bags and vacate my property. Marcus lunged forward, slamming his hands on the table. You cannot just throw my mother onto the street. What are you even going to do with that massive apartment? I have already signed a fast-track, all-cash closing contract with a corporate real estate developer, I replied, a cold smile finally reaching my eyes. The funds hit my private account next Friday. Once my mother is discharged from her rehabilitation center, I will be using that exact cash to take her on a lavish, extended vacation across the Mediterranean coast to properly recover. Your fake empire is funding my mother's second chance at life. Marcus stood completely paralyzed. His jaw hung slack. He finally grasped the absolute magnitude of his fatal error. He had looked at me across a romantic dinner table and told me my dying mother was not his problem. In return, I had completely dismantled his marriage, destroyed his relationship with his greedy family, and legally stripped him of every single ounce of wealth and power he thought he possessed. I did not wait for his pathetic response. I turned my back on the pathetic ruins of my marriage. I walked briskly into the hallway, grabbed the single suitcase I had quietly packed that morning, and opened the front door. A sleek black town car was already idling in the driveway, waiting to take me to a luxury hotel downtown. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me, completely and utterly free. Thank you all so much for listening to today's story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let us know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story incredibly satisfying and want to help us out, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our very best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment.